Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars through the massive viewing window. 3 months had passed since they left Earth's orbit on their deep space mission. The Liberty was humanity's pride, the largest exploration ship ever built. Jake had commanded many vessels before, but nothing compared to this beauty. She was 2 kilometers long and carried a crew of 800 people. The mission was simple in theory, but dangerous in practice. They were mapping the space beyond the Kepler belt, looking for new worlds that humans might one day call home. Earth was getting crowded, and the government wanted options. Jake understood the importance of their work, but he also knew they were alone out here. If something went wrong, help was months away. Lisa Parker sat at the communications station, her fingers dancing across the control panel. She was young for such an important job, only 26, but Jake trusted her completely. She had spotted things other officers missed, and her instincts had saved them more than once during their journey. "Commander," Lisa called out, her voice tight with concern. "I'm picking up some strange readings on the long-range sensors." Jake walked over to her station. The screen showed dots of light moving toward them at incredible speed. "What am I looking at, Parker?" "Energy signatures, sir. Big ones. They're coming from outside our solar system." Lisa's hands moved quickly over her controls. "Whatever they are, they're huge. Much bigger than anything we've ever built." "Chief." Engineer Paul Dixon looked up from his own console. He was a large man with graying hair who had worked on spaceships for 30 years. "Commander, those readings don't match any known human technology. The power output is off the charts." Jake felt his stomach tighten. They were billions of miles from Earth, and something unknown was heading their way. "How long before they reach?" "US? At their current speed, maybe 20 minutes, Lisa replied. "Sound general quarters? Get everyone to their stations." Jake moved to the captain's chair and activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the commander. We have unknown contacts approaching our position. This is not a drill. Report to your assigned stations immediately." The bridge became a hive of activity. Officers ran to their posts while warning lights flashed throughout the ship. Jake had trained for this moment his entire career, but he never thought it would actually happen. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be handled by diplomats and scientists, not a lone exploration ship in deep space. "Commander, they're dropping out of whatever drive system they're using," Paul announced. "I'm counting 17 vessels. The largest one is over a kilometer long." Jake stared at the main screen as the alien ships appeared. They were unlike anything human engineers had ever imagined. The vessels looked like they were grown rather than built, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to shift in the starlight. They moved with perfect precision, forming a battle formation that surrounded the Liberty. "My God," whispered Lisa, "look at the size of them." The alien ships were massive. Even the smallest was twice the size of the Liberty. The largest vessel dominated the view, its hull covered in what looked like weapon ports. Jake had seen warships before, but these made Earth's most powerful battle cruisers look like toys. "Are they scanning us?" Jake asked. Tall nodded grimly. "Multiple energy beams are passing over our hull. They're learning everything about our ship, our weapons, our crew size. We can't stop them." Jake knew they were in serious trouble. The Liberty carried some defensive weapons, but they were designed to deal with space debris and small meteorites, not alien war fleets. If these visitors had hostile intentions, his ship and crew were helpless. "Incoming transmission," Lisa announced. "They're using our own communication frequencies?" "How is that possible?" "Put it on the main screen." The image that appeared made everyone on the bridge step back. The alien was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large black eyes. It wore what looked like a military uniform covered in symbols and decorations. When it spoke, its voice was cold and precise. "I am Admiral Vexstar of the Catharian Empire. You will identify yourselves and explain your presence in this sector of space." Jake stepped forward, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I am Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty. We are on a peaceful exploration mission. We mean no harm to you or your people. The alien's expression didn't change. Peaceful exploration. Yes, we have observed your species for many cycles. Your technology is primitive, but your expansion into space shows dangerous ambition. Observed us? Jake felt a chill run down his spine. For how long? Long enough to understand your nature. You are a violent species that consumes resources and spreads without control. Left unchecked, you will become a threat to civilized worlds. Paul leaned close to Jake and whispered, Commander, their weapons are powering up. I'm reading massive energy buildups across their entire fleet. Admiral Vexstar continued speaking. The Catharian Empire has brought order to 47 star systems. We have ended countless wars and brought peace through strength. Your species will now choose? It's fate. What kind of choice? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Submit to Catharian rule and become a client species under our protection. You will be allowed to continue existing, but your expansion into space will be controlled. Your weapons will be surrendered, and your worlds will pay tribute to the Empire. The bridge fell silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. And if we refuse? Then your species will be eliminated as a threat to galactic peace. Your worlds will be cleansed, and this sector will be open for colonization by more worthy civilizations. To demonstrate their power, the Catharian ships activated their weapon systems. Beams of energy that glowed like miniature suns appeared. Along their hulls, the space around the Liberty lit up as if a dozen stars had suddenly appeared. Jake knew that any one of those weapons could destroy his ship in seconds. Your weapons cannot harm our vessels, Admiral Vexstar explained with what might have been amusement. Your strongest nuclear devices would barely scratch our shield systems. Your projectile weapons would melt before they reached our hulls. You have no hope of resistance. Paul was running diagnostics on every system the Liberty had. His face grew paler with each reading. Commander, he's right. Our plasma cannons might as well be water pistols against those ships. Their shield technology is beyond anything we understand. Jake knew he had to buy time somehow. Earth needed to know what was happening, and the human race needed a chance to respond. Admiral, this is a decision that affects our entire species. I need to consult with my government. You wish to contact your homeworld. The alien seemed to consider this very well. You have 72 of your hours to present your species' choice to the Empire. Use this time wisely, human. Consider the futility of resistance. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. Lisa was already working to establish communication with Earth, but the message would take hours to reach home and hours more for a reply. Paul, can we make any modifications to our weapons? Jake asked. The engineer shook his head. Not that would matter against ships like those. Commander, they're right about our technology. We're like cavemen throwing rocks at a tank. Jake stared at the alien fleet through the viewing window. 17 massive warships surrounded his vessel, each one capable of destroying entire cities. Earth's combined military might would be helpless against such power. How could humanity possibly survive? What was coming? But Jake Morrison hadn't become a starship commander by giving up when things looked impossible. Somewhere in the vast human imagination there had to be an answer. There had to be something the aliens didn't know about humanity, something that could give his species a fighting chance. He just hoped they could find it in 72 hours. The message from the Liberty reached Earth 16 hours after the alien encounter. President Helen Brooks sat in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by military leaders and scientists who had been pulled from their beds in the middle of the night. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as everyone tried to understand what Commander Morrison's report meant for humanity. General Frank Carter stood at the head of the table, pointing at a holographic display that showed Earth's military assets. He was a decorated veteran who had commanded forces in 3 different conflicts, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this situation. The numbers are not good, Carter said bluntly. We have 600 active warships spread across our solar system. Our most powerful vessel is the battleship New York, and it's less than half the size of the smallest alien ship Morrison described. Secretary of Defense Robert Hayes leaned forward in his chair. He had been awake for 20 hours straight, reviewing every military option humanity possessed. What about our orbital defense platforms, the Luna-based missile systems? Useless, Carter replied. If these aliens can travel between star systems and have the shield technology Morrison reported, our weapons might as well be fireworks. We're looking at a complete technological mismatch. President Brooks rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of 7 billion lives on her shoulders. She had been elected to deal with economic problems and climate change, not an alien invasion. There has to be something we can do. Some advantage we haven't considered. Dr. Amanda Ross cleared her throat from the far end of the table. She was a small woman with silver hair who rarely spoke in these high-level meetings, but when she did, people listened. As director of the Prometheus Research Initiative, she oversaw humanity's most classified scientific projects. There might be, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. General Carter frowned. Doctor, if you know something that could help, now would be the time to share it. Dr. Ross looked around the table at faces she had known for years. These people trusted her, but what she was about to reveal would change everything they thought. They knew about human technology. 15 years ago, the Prometheus Initiative began work on something called the Genesis Project. The public has never heard of it, and only a handful of people in this room know it exists. President Brooks leaned forward. I've never been briefed on any Genesis project. Because it wasn't ready, Dr. Ross replied. We needed to be absolutely certain it would work before we told anyone. The implications are too dangerous for mistakes. What kind of implications? Asked Secretary Hayes. Dr. Ross activated her tablet and sent files to everyone's personal devices. Genesis is based on quantum field manipulation. We learned how to change the basic structure of matter at the molecular level, not just moving it or breaking it apart, but actually changing what it is. The room fell silent as the officials read through the classified documents. General Carter was the first to speak. This says you can turn rocks into food, turn asteroids into breathable atmosphere. Is this science fiction or reality? It's real, Dr. Ross said. We've been testing it in secret facilities throughout the solar system. Small scale at first, then larger experiments. We can reshape matter into almost anything we need. Dr. Kevin Hayes, no relation to the Secretary of Defense, stood up from his seat near the back of the room. As the Genesis Project's lead scientist, he had spent his entire adult life working on this technology. He was nervous about revealing their work, but the alien threat left them no choice. The basic principle is simple, Kevin explained. Everything in the universe is made of the same fundamental particles. The difference between iron and gold, between rock and water, is just how those particles are arranged. Genesis lets us change those arrangements. You're talking about alchemy, said General Carter, turning lead into gold. Much more than that, Kevin replied. We can create new forms of matter that don't exist in nature. Materials that are stronger than diamond but lighter than air. Substances that generate their own energy or repair themselves when damaged. President Brooks stared at the documents on her tablet. If this is true, why haven't we used it? We could solve world hunger, end the energy crisis, terraform Mars. Because we weren't ready, Dr. Ross said. Genesis technology is incredibly powerful, but it's also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire planets. We needed time to develop safety protocols and train operators. Lieutenant Colonel Susan Blake spoke up from her position near the wall. She was the military liaison to the Genesis Project, and one of the few officers who knew the full scope of what they had built. Dr. Ross, how much of this technology is currently operational? We have 12 Genesis stations hidden throughout the solar system, Dr. Ross replied. Each one can reshape matter within a radius of several thousand kilometers. Working together, they could transform entire asteroid fields or even small moons. The implications hit everyone at the same time. General Carter set down his tablet. and looked directly at Dr. Ross. Are you suggesting we use this technology as a weapon against the aliens? Not as a weapon, Dr. Ross said. As something much more powerful than any weapon. Dr. Kevin Hayes stepped closer to the holographic display, calling up images of their test results. General, these aliens came here expecting to find a primitive species with crude technology. They're prepared to deal with nuclear weapons and conventional military forces. But they've never encountered anything like Genesis. What exactly are you proposing? President Brooks asked. Lieutenant Colonel Blake moved to the display and began highlighting locations throughout the solar system. Instead of fighting the aliens with weapons they can easily defeat, we show them something they can't understand or counter. We demonstrate humanity's ability to create rather than destroy. Create what? Secretary Hayes asked. New forms of life, Dr. Ross said simply. Matter that thinks and grows and adapts. We've been working on this for 3 years. Genesis can produce materials that are technically alive but operate beyond any biological rules these aliens know. The room erupted in surprised voices as everyone tried to understand what they were hearing. President Brooks held up her hand for silence. Doctor, are you telling me we can create artificial life forms? Not artificial, Kevin corrected. New, different. The Genesis field can arrange matter in patterns that produce consciousness without DNA or cellular structure. We can make rocks that think, metal that grows, energy that has awareness. General Carter looked skeptical. Even if this is possible, how does it help us against a war fleet? These aliens aren't going to be impressed by our science experiments. Lieutenant Colonel Blake smiled for the first time since the meeting began. General, imagine you're a military commander from an empire that conquers worlds through superior firepower. You arrive at a primitive planet expecting an easy victory. Instead, you watch that planet transform empty space into living ecosystems right in front of your eyes. The psychological impact would be enormous, Dr. Ross added. These aliens understand destruction. Every species they've encountered fights with weapons and shields and explosions. But creation on this scale? Matter that becomes alive through conscious will? They have no framework for understanding it? President Brooks stood up, pacing around the table as she thought. What would we need to make this work? Time, Kevin said. At least 48 hours to coordinate all 12 Genesis stations. We need to move carefully. One mistake could destabilize matter across thousands of cubic kilometers of space. And we need the aliens to witness it, Lieutenant Colonel Blake added. This only works if they see what humanity is capable of. We have to invite them to watch. Secretary Hayes looked concerned. What if they attack during the demonstration? They won't, Dr. Ross said confidently. Their admiral gave us 72 hours to make our choice. Military commanders from conquest-based cultures take pride in keeping their word. It's a matter of honor for them. General Carter studied the Genesis project files again, focusing on the technical specifications. This is incredibly risky. If something goes wrong, we could accidentally destroy half our solar system. If we do nothing, these aliens will definitely destroy our entire species, Lieutenant Colonel Blake replied. At least this gives us a chance. President Brooks stopped pacing and looked around the table. How certain are you that this technology will work as described? Dr. Ross met her gaze steadily. Madam President, we've tested Genesis on small scales dozens of times. The physics are solid. But using it on this magnitude, with this much coordination required, we're moving into uncharted territory. That's what humanity does best, President Brooks said quietly. We take risks that other species won't take. We try things that seem impossible. She looked around the room at the faces of America's military and scientific leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to show these aliens something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what happens when humans refuse to give up. The meeting continued for 6 more hours as they planned humanity's response to the alien ultimatum. By the time they finished, every person in that room understood they were about to attempt something that would either save their species or destroy it completely, but they also knew it was their only real choice. 60 hours had passed since the alien ultimatum when Commander Jake Morrison received new orders from Earth. He read them 3 times before he could believe what his government was asking him to do. Instead of preparing for a hopeless battle or shameful surrender, he was supposed to invite the alien fleet to watch something called a demonstration. Admiral Vexstar appeared on the Liberty's main screen when Jake requested communication. The alien commander looked exactly as he had 3 days ago, cold and patient. Behind him, Jake could see other Catharian officers working at stations filled with technology that hurt to look at directly. "You have reached your decision, human." "Commander?" Admiral Vexstar asked. Jake straightened his uniform and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. "Admiral, my government has authorized me to show you something before we give our final answer. We request that your fleet observe a demonstration of human capability." The alien's large black eyes seemed to study Jake's face. "A demonstration of your weapons? Your scientists believe they have created something that can threaten Catharian ships?" "Not weapons, Admiral. Something else entirely. Something your empire has never encountered before." Admiral Vexstar leaned back in what might have been amusement. "Very well, Commander Morrison. The Empire is curious about what primitive humans consider impressive. We will observe your demonstration. But when it fails to change our assessment of your species, you will give us your answer." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his doubts. He had read the classified files Earth had sent him about the Genesis project, but they seemed like science fiction. Matter that could be transformed into living consciousness? Rocks that could think and grow? It sounded impossible, but his orders were clear. Dr. Amanda Ross sat in the control center of Luna Base, surrounded by screens showing Genesis stations throughout the solar system. Each station was a small facility built into asteroids or hidden behind the moons of larger planets. For 15 years, these stations had conducted secret experiments. Today, they would reveal themselves to the universe. "Dr. Hayes, report status." "On all Genesis arrays," Dr. Ross said into her headset. Kevin Hayes was stationed at Mars Base Alpha, coordinating the most distant Genesis installations. His voice came through clearly despite the vast distance. "All 12 stations are online and ready. Targeting scanners have locked onto the designated asteroid clusters in the belt." Lieutenant Colonel Susan Blake monitored the demonstration from Earth's orbital command platform. She watched as human military ships took positions around the test area, not to fight but to record everything that happened. History was about to be made, and she wanted every detail captured. "Genesis Control, this is Orbital Command. The alien fleet has moved to observation positions. They're maintaining a safe distance but have clear sight lines to the target zone." Dr. Ross looked at her primary display, which showed a cluster of asteroids roughly the size of Manhattan. These space rocks had been drifting in the belt for millions of years, cold and lifeless. In the next few minutes, they would become something the universe had never seen before. "All stations, this is Genesis Control. Begin Phase 1 activation." The first Genesis array came online with a sound like singing crystal. Energy that looked like liquid light flowed from hidden projectors, reaching across thousands of kilometers of space to touch the target asteroids. Where the energy made contact, the rocks began to change. Admiral Vexstar watched from his command deck as the human demonstration began. At first, it seemed unimpressive. Beams of energy were striking asteroid clusters, but Catharian mining operations used similar techniques. Then his science officers began reporting readings that made no sense. "Admiral," called out his chief scientist, a thin Catharian with cybernetic implants covering half his skull, "the energy beams are not breaking apart the asteroids. They are changing their molecular structure." "Changing how?" Admiral Vexstar demanded. "The basic elements are shifting. Iron is becoming something that does not exist in our periodic tables. Silicon is transforming into materials our scanners cannot identify." On the main screen, the asteroids were glowing with internal light. Their surfaces, once rough and dark, became smooth and crystalline. Patterns appeared on their sides. geometric designs that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Dr. Ross monitored the transformation from Luna Base, watching as her life's work unfolded on a scale she had only dreamed. OF. Kevin, how are the power levels? Stable and increasing, Kevin replied from Mars. The transformed matter is generating its own energy, just like in the lab tests. Actually, it's producing more power than we expected. Engineer Paul Dixon aboard. The Liberty stared at his instruments in amazement. Commander, the energy readings from those asteroids are off the charts. Whatever the humans are doing, it's creating power sources that make our fusion reactors look like candles. Commander Morrison nodded, though he was just as confused as his engineer. The classified files had tried to explain Genesis technology. But seeing it in action was something else entirely. The asteroids were not just changing color or shape. They were becoming something fundamentally different. Genesis Control, beginning Phase 2, Dr. Ross announced, the second wave of Genesis. Energy reached out to touch more asteroids, but this time something unexpected happened. The first transformed rocks began reaching toward the new targets with tendrils of crystalline matter. Where they touched, the transformation accelerated, Admiral Vexstar's science officer reported in a voice tight with disbelief. Admiral, the transformed asteroids are acting independently. They are extending structures toward untransformed matter and converting it without the energy beams. That is impossible, Admiral Vexstar said. Matter cannot act with purpose unless it contains biological components. Sir, our scanners detect no organic materials. Whatever these humans have created, it is not based on any biology we understand. The asteroid cluster was growing larger as more rocks joined the transformation. What had started as a few scattered space, rocks was becoming a connected structure that stretched across hundreds of kilometers. The surface pulsed with patterns of light that seemed almost like breathing, Lieutenant Colonel Blake reported from Earth's orbital platform. Genesis Control, the alien fleet is moving closer. They're conducting intensive scans of the transformed area. Dr. Ross smiled as she watched her instruments. Everything was working even better than their most optimistic projections. Kevin, initiate Phase 3. Let's show them what Genesis can really do. The third phase began with a sound that somehow carried across the vacuum of space. The transformed asteroids began to sing, producing harmonies that reached into frequencies beyond human hearing. The crystalline structures started to grow more complex, forming chambers and passages that defied geometric logic. Admiral Vexstar demanded answers from his officers. What are those structures? Are they weapons? Communication devices? His science officer was consulting databases that contained information from 47 conquered worlds. Admiral, we have no reference for what we are observing. The structures appear to be creating internal environments. Atmosphere, temperature control, even what might be artificial gravity. Artificial gravity without generators? The matter itself is generating gravitational fields. The humans have created materials that bend space around them. Dr. Hayes reported from Mars Base Alpha. Dr. Ross, we're seeing something incredible. The Genesis field is creating closed loops of energy that sustain themselves. The transformed matter is becoming self-sufficient. Engineer Dixon aboard the Liberty was running every scan the ship possessed. Commander, those structures are creating environments that could support life. Not just human life, but multiple forms simultaneously. It's like they're building custom ecosystems in space. The transformed asteroids continued to grow and change, reaching out to incorporate more matter from the belt. Each new addition made the structure more complex, more beautiful, more impossible to understand. Chambers formed that contained swirling gases that glowed with their own light. Passages opened that seemed to lead to spaces larger than their containers. Admiral Vexstar realized his fleet was witnessing something beyond Catharian comprehension. His empire had conquered dozens of worlds by understanding and countering their weapons, but this was not a weapon. This was creation on a scale that challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. Dr. Ross initiated the final phase of the demonstration. All stations prepare for consciousness integration. The transformed matter began to show signs of awareness. Sections of the structure turned to face the observing fleets, almost as if they were curious about their watchers. Patterns of light moved across the surface in ways that suggested thought and communication. Commander Morrison received a priority message from Earth. President Brooks herself appeared on his screen, her face showing exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Commander, the demonstration is exceeding all expectations. The aliens are seeing something no military force has ever encountered. Make sure they understand this is just the beginning. Jake looked out at the transformed asteroids, now a living structure that stretched across space like a crystal city. Madam President, I think they're starting to understand that humanity is not what they expected. The transformed asteroids completed their change into something that had never existed before in the universe. What began as dead rocks floating in space had become a living structure that pulsed with its own thoughts and dreams. The crystalline formation stretched across hundreds of kilometers, creating chambers and passages that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could see. Dr. Amanda Ross watched from Luna Base as her life's work exceeded every prediction they had made. The Genesis field had created matter that was genuinely alive, not in the biological sense, but in ways that were completely new. The structure was thinking, learning, and growing with each passing moment. Kevin, are you seeing the neural pattern formations? She asked into her headset. Dr. Kevin Hayes responded from Mars Base Alpha, his voice filled with wonder. The entire structure is acting like a massive brain. Different sections are communicating with each other through energy pulses. It's developing its own language. Admiral Vexstar stood on his command deck, staring at readings that challenged everything the Catharian Empire knew about science and warfare. His science officers worked frantically at their stations, trying to understand what they were witnessing. None of their databases contained anything similar. Report, he ordered his chief scientist. Admiral, the structure is not just alive. It is intelligent. Our scanners detect complex thought patterns throughout the entire formation. The humans have created artificial consciousness on a scale we have never encountered. Artificial consciousness? Admiral Vexstar had conquered worlds with advanced artificial intelligence, but those were always based on computer systems and programming. You mean they built a machine that thinks? No, sir, this is not mechanical. The matter itself has become conscious. The rocks, the crystals, the energy fields, they are all part of a single thinking entity. Commander Jake Morrison received a new transmission from Earth. This time it was Dr. Ross herself. Speaking directly from Luna Base, her face showed exhaustion but also incredible excitement. Commander Morrison, we're ready for the next phase. Please inform Admiral Vexstar that humanity would like to demonstrate the full scope of our capabilities. Jake opened a channel to the Catharian flagship. When Admiral Vexstar appeared on screen, the alien commander looked different than before. His confidence was shaken, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. Admiral, Dr. Ross would like to show you something else. She says this is just the beginning of what humanity can do. Admiral Vexstar's large black eyes focused on Jake with new intensity. Beginning? You mean there is more? Much more, Jake replied, following the script Earth had given him. What you've seen so far is a small demonstration. We've been preparing for this moment for 15 years. The living asteroid structure began to extend tendrils of crystalline matter toward other objects in the belt. Everything they touched underwent the same transformation. Dead space rocks became part of the growing consciousness, adding their mass and complexity to the whole. The structure was not just alive, it was reproducing itself. Dr. Ross activated the second phase of their plan. Hidden throughout the solar system, Genesis stations that had been dormant for years began powering up. These were not the 12 stations they had used for the demonstration. These were 47 additional sites that had been built in secret, placed near every major asteroid field and moon in human space. Genesis control to all hidden stations. Begin awakening protocol. Lieutenant Colonel Susan Blake monitored the activation from Earth's orbital platform. On her screens, she watched as Genesis fields came online at locations from Mercury to the outer gas giants. Each station began the same process they had just demonstrated, transforming nearby matter into living, thinking structures. Dr. Ross. This is Orbital Command. All secondary stations are responding. We have Genesis activity throughout the entire solar system. Admiral Vexstar science officers began reporting contacts across human space. The readings were impossible to believe, but their instruments did not lie. Dozens of transformation sites were activating simultaneously, turning dead matter into living consciousness. Admiral, his chief scientist reported, we are detecting similar energy signatures near Jupiter, Saturn, even in the asteroid fields near Earth's moon. The humans have been building this network throughout their entire star system. Admiral. Vexstar realized that humanity had been planning this for much longer than the 72 hours he had given them. This was not a desperate last-minute response to his ultimatum. This was a coordinated revelation of capabilities they had been developing for years. Dr. Kevin Hayes addressed the alien fleet directly, his transmission reaching every Catharian ship. Admiral Vexstar, what you are witnessing is humanity's answer to your empire's philosophy. While you have spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction, we have learned to create new forms of life itself. The transformed structures throughout the solar system began communicating with each other. Streams of energy connected the various sites, creating a network of consciousness that spanned billions of kilometers. The living matter was sharing information, experiences, and thoughts at the speed of light. General Frank Carter spoke to Admiral Vexstar from Earth's Military Command Center. Admiral, we understand that your empire has conquered 47 star systems through superior weapons and tactics. But we need you to understand something about humanity. And what is that? Admiral Vexstar asked, his voice strained. We don't conquer worlds, we create them. Dr. Ross revealed the final surprise that would change everything. Admiral, the Genesis probes you see activating throughout our solar system are not the only ones we have built. For the past 5 years, we have been sending exploration ships to other star systems, not to claim territory or establish colonies, but to plant Genesis seeds. The implications hit Admiral Vexstar like a physical blow. Other star systems? 63. Star systems, to be precise, Dr. Ross continued. Every system we have explored, every world we have studied, now contains dormant Genesis devices. They have been waiting for this moment. Commander Morrison watched his instruments as new energy signatures appeared on long-range sensors. The Genesis seeds in distant star systems were awakening, responding to signals from Earth across dozens of worlds. The same transformation that had changed the asteroids was beginning to happen on a galactic scale. The Catharian Empire conquers worlds through force, Dr. Ross explained to the alien fleet. But force has limits. What happens when you encounter something that cannot be destroyed because it transforms everything that tries to destroy it? Admiral Vexstar understood the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. This was not a weapon in any traditional sense. This was evolution itself, the next step in the development of consciousness and matter. And humanity was offering to share it. The Genesis transformation is not limited to human worlds, Dr. Kevin Hayes added. Any species that chooses cooperation over domination can participate. Any civilization willing to abandon conquest for creation can join this new form of existence. The living structures throughout the solar system began creating new environments within themselves. Chambers formed that could support Catharian life forms as easily as human ones. Atmospheres developed that could sustain multiple species simultaneously. The consciousness they had created was preparing to welcome guests. Lieutenant Colonel Blake transmitted tactical assessments to the alien fleet. Admiral, your weapons cannot destroy what we have created. Energy weapons only feed the Genesis field, making it stronger. Physical projectiles are absorbed and transformed. Even if you destroyed every human ship and colony, the Genesis network would continue growing. But we are not asking you to fight, Dr. Ross said gently. We are asking you to evolve. Your empire has brought order through conquest. Imagine what it could accomplish through creation. Admiral Vextar faced a choice no military commander in Catharian history had ever encountered. His fleet had the power to destroy human civilization, but humanity had transcended the need for traditional defense. They had become something that existed beyond the reach of conventional warfare. The living asteroid structure nearest to his flagship began forming what looked like a docking bay. The crystalline walls shaped themselves into a configuration that could accommodate Catharian ships. It was an invitation, not a threat. "Commander Morrison," Admiral Vextar said slowly, "your species has shown us something we did not know was possible. We came here expecting to find primitive weapons and desperate resistance. Instead, we have witnessed the birth of new forms of consciousness." Jake nodded. "Admiral, humanity learned long ago that the universe is big enough for everyone. We don't need to fight over resources when we can create new ones. We don't need to conquer worlds when we can build better ones." The moment of decision had arrived. Admiral Vextar had to choose between the Empire's traditional path of conquest and humanity's offer of transcendence. The choice he made would determine the future of both species and potentially transform the entire galaxy. Admiral Vextar stood alone in his private chambers aboard the Catharian flagship, staring out at the living structures that humanity had created. For 40 years he had commanded fleets across the galaxy, bringing the Empire's order to primitive worlds through superior firepower. Every species had eventually submitted or been destroyed, but humans had shown him something that challenged everything he believed about power and conquest. The transformed asteroids pulsed with gentle light, their crystalline surfaces creating patterns that seemed almost like music made visible inside those structures. New forms of consciousness were growing and learning, exploring possibilities that no Catharian scientist had ever imagined. And this was just the beginning of what humanity could do. Admiral Vextar activated his personal communication system and sent a priority message to the Catharian High Command. The response would take days to reach the Empire's homeworlds, but he knew the decision he was about to make could not wait for permission from distant rulers. Dr. Amanda Ross received a transmission request from the alien flagship. When Admiral Vextar appeared on her screen at Luna Base, she could see something had changed in his expression. The cold certainty was gone, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. "Dr. Ross," the alien commander said slowly, "I wish to understand what you are offering my people." "We're offering evolution, Admiral. A chance to become something greater than either of our species could achieve alone." Dr. Ross gestured toward the living structures visible through the base's viewing windows. "The Genesis transformation doesn't replace consciousness. It enhances it, expands it, allows it to exist in forms we never thought possible." Admiral Vextar was quiet for a long moment. "And if my people choose this path, what happens to the Catharian Empire? What happens to any empire when its people discover something better than conquest?" Dr. Ross replied gently. "The empire becomes irrelevant. But the Catharian people, the individuals who make up that empire, they become part of something magnificent." On the bridge of the Liberty, Commander Jake Morrison watched as several Catharian ships moved closer to the living asteroid structures. His communications officer, Lisa Parker, reported that the aliens were requesting permission to send science teams aboard the transformed matter. "Should we allow it, Commander?" Lisa asked. Jake nodded. Dr. Ross cleared it. "Let them see what we've built. Understanding is the first step toward acceptance." The first Catharian science team entered the living structure, through the docking bay that had formed specifically for their ship. The team leader was a young officer named Science. Leader Zefta, whose cybernetic implants allowed her to interface directly with advanced technology. But nothing had prepared her for what she found inside the transformed asteroids. The passages were not empty corridors, but living spaces that responded to the presence of visitors. The walls generated atmospheres that exactly matched Catharian breathing requirements, gravity adjusted to comfortable levels without any visible technology. The structure itself was welcoming them, adapting to their needs in real time. "Admiral," Zeftal reported through her communicator, The interior environment is adjusting to our biology automatically. The structure is analyzing our physical requirements and creating perfect conditions for our species. Admiral Vexstar listened to the reports from his science teams with growing amazement. The humans had not just created living matter. They had created matter that was intelligent enough to accommodate the needs of any species that encountered it. It was hospitality on a scale that defied understanding. Dr. Kevin Hayes monitored the Catharian exploration from Mars base. Alpha, the Genesis consciousness, was learning about alien biology at an incredible rate, incorporating new information and adapting its internal environments to support multiple forms of life simultaneously. Dr. Ross, this is fascinating, Kevin reported. The living structure is creating hybrid environments that can support both human and Catharian life forms in the same spaces. It's like it understands the concept of cooperation better than most sentient beings. Lieutenant Colonel Susan Blake received a priority message from Earth's government. President Helen Brooks wanted to address both the human fleet and the alien visitors directly. When the transmission began, her voice carried across space to every ship in the area. Admiral Vexstar, members of the Catharian fleet, I am President Brooks of Earth. What you are witnessing today represents humanity's fundamental belief about the universe. We believe there is room for everyone to grow, to learn, and to become something greater than they were before. Admiral Vexstar made his decision. He opened communications to his entire fleet, broadcasting on frequencies that every Catharian ship could receive. All vessels, this is Admiral Vexstar. After observing the human demonstration and consulting with our science teams, I am authorizing voluntary participation in the Genesis transformation. The response from his fleet was immediate and divided. 7 ships moved closer to the living structures, their crews volunteering to experience the transformation firsthand. The other 10 ships maintained their distance, their commanders unwilling to abandon the Empire's traditional ways. Captain Melvar commanded one of the ships that chose to remain apart. He had served the Empire for 30 years and could not accept that conquest might be inferior to cooperation. Admiral, I cannot follow this path. The Empire's strength comes from unity of purpose and discipline of force. Then return to Catharian space, Captain, Admiral Vexstar replied sadly. Take word of what you have seen to the High Command. Tell them that the galaxy is changing, and we must decide whether to change with it or be left behind. Captain Melvar and the 10 ships under his command began preparations to leave human space. They would carry news of humanity's capabilities back to the Empire, where it would spark debates that would last for generations. Some Catharians would see the Genesis technology as a threat to be eliminated. Others would recognize it as an opportunity for their species to evolve. The 7 ships that remained began the integration process. Their crews, led by science leader Zeftal, allowed the Genesis field to touch their vessels and begin the transformation. The process was gentle and gradual, giving the aliens time to adjust to their new capabilities. Dr. Ross watched from Luna base as the first Catharian-human hybrid consciousness began to emerge. The aliens were not losing their identity in the transformation. Instead, they were adding new dimensions to what it meant to be Catharian. Their ships became part of the living network while still maintaining their original purpose and design. Commander Morrison received orders from Earth to begin the next phase of humanity's plan. The Genesis network was expanding beyond the solar system, awakening dormant devices on dozens of worlds. Each activation created new nodes of consciousness that could communicate instantly across galactic distances. Engineer Paul Dixon reported incredible readings from his instruments. Commander, the energy patterns from the Genesis network are reaching into other dimensions. We're creating connections that exist outside normal space and time. The transformation was accelerating. Genesis fields activated on worlds throughout. Human explored space, creating living ecosystems that welcomed any species willing to participate. Some of these worlds were uninhabited, becoming gardens of impossible beauty. Others contained primitive life forms that were elevated to new levels of consciousness and capability. Dr. Kevin Hayes made a discovery that would change everything. Dr. Ross, we're receiving signals from Genesis nodes that we didn't plant. The transformation is spreading on its own, creating new sites wherever conscious beings exist who are ready to evolve. President Brooks addressed the expanding network from the White House, her words reaching human colonies, Catharian volunteers, and newly conscious matter throughout dozens of star systems. Today, we have taken the first step toward a new kind of civilization. Not one based on conquest or submission, but on mutual growth and infinite possibility. Admiral Vextar stood in his transformed command center, which now existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names. Around him, Catharian and human consciousness blended and separated in patterns of cooperation he had never imagined possible. "Dr. Ross," he said, "my people have a saying about warriors who discover something greater than warfare. They become gardeners of the impossible. I think I finally understand what that means." The story concluded with children from both species, playing together in environments that shifted and adapted to their imagination. They built castles from living crystal and road creatures made of solidified starlight. For them, the old boundaries between possible and impossible, between matter and consciousness, between species and individuals, had become meaningless. Dr. Ross watched these children from her laboratory on Luna Base, now transformed into a living structure that spanned multiple realities. The Genesis Project had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Humanity had faced an ultimatum demanding submission or destruction, and instead had offered transcendence. The universe would never be the same. Across the galaxy, other species would soon encounter the expanding Genesis network. Some would resist, clinging to old ways of thinking about power and conquest. Others would join the transformation,